Dave Richard here to give us some bold fantasy predictions. And I think most people know that his value has been cut down because we don't know how many games he's going to play. But you're here to tell us, even if he does play all the games, he's not a top quarterback.
I think we've got to take everything that we know about Shaun Watson, including the top 5 finish that he had in 2020, and just completely forget about it. You know, one of those Men in Black devices that just makes you forget about his past, because he's in a completely different situation now with the Browns than he was in with the Houston Texans. Think about the receivers that he had in Houston. He had DeAndre Hopkins, and then he had Will Fuller during Fuller's breakout year. He also threw the ball 63% of the time in that 2020 season. Now he's going to a Browns team. Amari Cooper is their number 1 receiver, their number 2 receiver. A legit question mark between guys like Donovan Peoples-Jones, Anthony Schwartz, tight end David Njoku, rookie David Bell. Do any of these names make you feel good about the targets that Deshaun Watson will throw to? The answer is no. And then you also think about Kevin Stefanski and his track record as a play caller. Last year was the most he's ever called pass plays at 54%. That was the rate of pass plays that the Browns had last year. That's lower than any rate in the last 3 years that Deshaun Watson played that he threw the ball. It was anywhere between 55% to 63% in 2020. It's a concern. I think people are going to overdraft Deshaun Watson. And I think even if he takes an 8-game suspension, he comes back, completely different division that he's in. He's in the AFC North now. It's going to be tougher competition. It's a tougher schedule. He's got weaker receivers to throw to. I think he's going to not be as good as we remember him.
And no longer inside, in a dome, in a controlled environment, no longer playing Southern teams. He's out in the elements.
He's out in the elements, which makes a difference. Do you know that there have been only 4 quarterbacks in the history of the Cleveland Browns franchise that have averaged north of 250 passing yards per year? None over 270.
Man.
None over 270. And that big year that he had in 2020, that top 5 finish, 300 passing yards per game for Deshaun Watson.
Your next bold prediction is at the running back position, and it's a guy in James Conner who really had a bounce-back breakout year last year with the Cardinals.
He did, with 18 touchdowns, but he was otherwise horribly efficient, or I should say inefficient, as a running back with Arizona, and now he's going to get more work with the Cardinals. I know it sounds good for fantasy, but the dude's 27 years old, and we've seen this from him before. When he's had a big year, what happened the year after that? 2018, he had 13 touchdowns, 1,400 total yards. He regressed. He played only 10 games. His rushing average dropped by half a yard. His receiving average dropped by 1.5 yards. His rushing touchdown rate went from 1 every 18 carries to 1 every 29 carries. He's coming off of a season where he scored a touchdown 1 every 13.2 touches. That's not happening again for James Conner. I'm worried about him staying healthy. I'm worried about that offensive line, too. That's an old offensive line in Arizona, and they just added Marquise Brown. I think they'll take to the air a little bit more. I think Conner's somebody that you try and avoid taking, unless it's like late round 3. I'd be kind of okay with that. And I think they're scheduled at the early part of the season when we know Conner will theoretically be healthy. That's fine, but I'm flipping him as soon as he has a big game.
Had a surprise top 10 performance last season. Now another surprise top 10 performer, at least in PPR. Deontay Johnson last season, but he had a Hall of Fame quarterback then, and Ben Roethlisberger does not this season.
And he wasn't a great passer last year. In fact, the last 2 years for Roethlisberger, he wasn't great, but they had him throwing the ball a ton, over 63% pass rate each of the last 2 seasons. I think the Steelers, now that they've got Mitchell Trubisky and Kenny Pickett at quarterback, they're going to try and reconfigure that passing game. And they're not going to throw as much downfield as they did in prior years. And I say throwing downfield, I should put quotes around that, because Roethlisberger didn't throw downfield that much. The ADOT for Deontay Johnson was about 8.5 yards. That's low. And his catch rate was only 63% on those types of passes. That's weird. Why isn't he catching 70% of his throws? Why isn't he doing more when those targets are short targets? I think they're going to spread the ball around a little bit more. I think Najee Harris is going to get a lot of work in this offense. I think Deontay Johnson won't get the type of target share that we're used to seeing. That's what carried him to greatness in fantasy. He won't do it this year. He won't be a top 20 fantasy receiver.
Okay, so that's the bad news. You started with 3 downgrades. How about somebody who's going to make a big leap this season at the wide receiver position?
How about 23-year-old Gabriel Davis? And we all saw it in their playoff loss against Kansas City, where he had 4 touchdowns. And I'm not basing it off of that game, but I am going to base it on how he finished that year. Because starting in Week 14, the Bills gave him a lot more playing time. He lined up wide 80% of the snaps in that offense. And that's an offense that continued to prove this offseason that it's all about Josh Allen. They did nothing to really address their run game. They're going to let Josh Allen just take off and throw the football. Here's a guy who will not be replaced on the outside as a downfield threat, because they don't have anybody else for them to go with. And even if you take out that game, he averaged around 8 targets per game in those last 6 games. Even if you take it out, it's 7 targets per game and 4 touchdowns in 5 games. He's going to be a touchdown magnet this year, and I think he's got a shot to finish as a top 15 fantasy receiver, and you don't have to draft him that way. He's a top 30 guy for me, just outside of my top 24. Happy to have Gabriel Davis in round 6.
Yeah, he finished, I think, 70th last year in PPR, has him all the way in the top 15.
He was invisible for the first 2/3 of the season. And then
52
Buffalo's like, oh,
points.
wait, we've got this guy who's like 6'2", and he's fast. Why don't we see what he can do? And they liked him so much, there's no more Emmanuel Sanders. They did nothing to address the perimeter receivers on their depth chart. It's him, it's Diggs, that's it.
Let's move on to a guy who has a big name but has not performed up to that big name the last few seasons. That's Adam Thielen in Minnesota with a new head coach, offensive-minded.
That's narrative. He's finished top 15 in PPR points per game 3 of the last 4 seasons, but people don't want to talk about it with Thielen because he's older and because he's gotten hurt a couple of times. But when he's in the red zone, that's Kirk Cousins' guy. We've seen Adam Thielen pick up tons of touchdowns, scored in 10 of 11 games last year before he got hurt in week 12, and he's just been outstanding. 17 PPR points per game before he got hurt, at least 15 PPR points in 7 of those 11 games, and I think he's going to continue to keep scoring. Why? Because he's been doing it with Kirk Cousins as his quarterback each of the last 4 seasons. His target share inside the 10 has been, I had to write this down, anywhere from 27% to 43% when he's been healthy with Kirk Cousins. And this is an offense that liked to run the football when they were inside the 10. They were in the bottom 3 in pass rate inside the 10 each of the last 3 seasons. That's changing with Kevin O'Connell coming in. I think you're going to continue to see a lot of targets for Adam Thielen. I think the dude's going to be an outstanding value on draft day.
Only have about 45 seconds for our last bold prediction from Dave Richard. How about a bold prediction for a tight end?
How about Gerald Everett is the guy that ends up having his breakout year with the Chargers? This is an awesome offense. They're going to throw the ball a ton. From week 9 on, in a completely different offense, he averaged almost 9 PPR points per game. To finish in the top 12 at tight end, you need about 9.5. I think he can get over 9.5 and maybe even 10. And the best part about Gerald Everett is the schedule to open the season. Raiders, Chiefs, Jaguars, Texans. Where's the tough competition for tight ends? It's not there. He's your stream to start tight end to begin the year.
Dave Richard with bold predictions here in fantasy football for the upcoming season. Check out
instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.